Thank you so much, Prof. And greetings to all the colleagues who have joined. I was expecting a lot of students, Prof, as we previously discussed. So I have pitched the presentation at a certain level. I have done a similar presentation before for our e-teacher training. So I'm hoping that even all the staff who are here, particularly those who have not been exposed to qualitative research, they will be able to benefit a lot from the presentation. Mainly, the focus will be on, I've actually divided it into three sections. The first section, I'm going to focus on understanding research and then also look at the principle of scientific research briefly. I'm just going to provide a background with those slides and also focus on research approach. And then on section B, I will focus particularly on qualitative research design and qualitative research methods and techniques. It might look like it's long when you look at the overview, but I think I'll keep it as brief as possible. And if you feel like I'm moving too fast, please feel free to stop me. The last part basically will be more on the practical ways on how to prepare for a qualitative research project. Usually when one starts with a presentation on research, wants to engage on what colleagues understand with regard to research. And I mean, I don't want to take much time and go into questioning. Usually, if you were in a class setting, I would have engaged you more just to hear your views about research. What do you think is research? But I think if colleagues can, engage on the chat, I'll be checking them as I present. But I wanted to just find out what's your view about research. And obviously, when one think of research and we get involved in research on everyday activities. I mean, on a broadly perspective, one can actually think of research as intended to uncover interesting or new facts. I usually say every one of us, whether you are a lecturer, whether you are a student, whether you are just a parent, we are all involved in some form of research. You might be going for a shopping, you check what kind of items, those items which are cheaper than the other, which kind of items are on sale. That's a form of research. But one needs to always distinguish that from any kind of the kind of research that we require in academic. I remember asking this question in one of my presentations. I mean, those who know these shows, they know that, the presenter keeps saying, let me do my research, let me do my research. And the question that one can pose, are this or this kind of show, do they follow a research approach that you might actually view as falling within an educational research? And the answer is no, they don't follow that, although they have some form of research, just any other person does research. What we're talking about when we speak about research, we want to focus on what we call a scientific research. And that's where the crask is. When we think of qualitative research, it is not just any kind of research, but it's a scientific research that we're speaking about. And what is scientific research? I think that's the most important part. When we speak about scientific research, we are speaking about a systemic, a coherent and rigorous study of a particular phenomenon with the purpose of contributing to new knowledge or validating the existing one. I think this is very important to emphasize because when people do research, you hear a lot of supervisors speak about you need to contribute to knowledge, you need to contribute to knowledge. But I think one needs to also emphasize, you might also validate the existing one that is already there, and that's your form of contribution. However, one can come with a particular kind of knowledge, and I'm going to speak about it later, that even what we might call a peculiar knowledge, you find that somebody has discovered a similar thing somewhere. I think it's the context that matter and that distinguish that particular knowledge to any other form of knowledge. Now, when we speak about contributions, one needs to know that they differ. Contributions differ in their level of impact within the scientific world or platform, if I might put it that way. For example, I mean, in the past years, I remember around, I think in the early around 1976, there was a groundbreaking research by a surgeon in UCT who came with the first human transplant around 1960. 1967, following the first heart transplant done by the American doctor on the dog a few years ago. So there was a research that was done on dogs, and the same research was developed further to lead to a first human transplant. You will remember last year, 2 years back rather, in 2019, there was a first ever middle ear transplant using a 3D printed technology to print the reconstructed bone of the middle ear. And that, I think, was done at the Steve Biko Academic Hospital. Now, those are groundbreaking research contribution. However, there are other levels of contribution. And I make an example that when we all did our master's, when we all did our PhD, we did a form of contribution to knowledge, regardless of how small it might look within your field, but it is still a form of contribution into knowledge. And I remember, when I started with my aim, I used to go to the library and look at the archives and see what people have filed or submitted as part of their PhD, part of their masters. And we used to focus on the thickness of the thesis, how thick it is when you look at it. And I've realized that as time goes on, you realize that the thickness of the document or your thesis or your dissertation, it is not as much important as the content and the contribution that you make into that particular field. I did my PhD in psychology. My wife is busy with her PhD in law. And we come from psychology background, and she was telling me she was shocked to see at the PhD thesis for law. I mean, it is so small that you feel like it's just a mini thesis or even a last of the year assignment, because the focus is no longer on the size of the document. And I think that's where we come from, but it's on the content that you release that contribute to that particular knowledge. And I want to bring that to your attention when you speak about why are we conducting research. Yes, we want to contribute to knowledge, but the focus should not be on the quantity, but the quality of that particular contribution. I give an example. When I did a study in my PhD, I focus on a conceptual framework on parental support, where I support learners' development of second language proficiency. But when you do that, you realize that although you want to contribute to knowledge, somebody has already contributed to that particular knowledge. And I found that, for example, in Canada, they've already done a lot of work with regard to second language proficiency. And what now one needs to do, you want to now distinguish your contribution from those that have already been done anywhere else in the world. And I realize that that's where now the niche comes in, where you now start to focus on a particular problem or a particular niche. And I'm going to talk about that also later, where you look at the fact that even though they have focused on language proficiency, Canada doesn't have the similar situation that we have in South Africa. They are not dealing with the language challenges that we have, where we have the 11 official languages, where all the languages that we have, majority of them, particularly the one that we'll call the original South African languages, they are not well developed, or they don't even have much platform. But in addition to that, one then looks at, do we have the same parental support needs or challenges that Canada has? And those are the things that one had to look at in order to make sure that your contribution to knowledge, although it might look small compared to Canada, but it is still significant within the South African context. And one needs to know that, and that's the point I want to emphasize when it comes to whenever we speak about a scientific research, the most important thing, we need to also think about what kind of contribution we have. And the other thing about contribution, researchers will tell you, an article production becomes one of the marker of the impact of contribution. It is one thing to do research, but it's another to be able to produce an article or research from that particular research process. I mean, I'm not going to dwell much there. I mean, everybody who has published know the challenges that relate to publishing an article. But the point that I want to emphasize is that depending on the level of study, the contribution will differ. For example, When you have an honor student involved in your research project, for example, at honors level, one will expect a basic research skill in a particular field, whether that is produced through a mini dissertation or a group work. This could be your honor student where you make them do a form of research. You want at a certain level, and I think SMU is a bit different compared to other institutes. If you go to your UP or UNISA, you realize that the level of exposure that our students get exposed to in research, it is very high at an honors level. And it's shocking with SMU that you can find a person at a master's level, and I speak postmaster's level, a person maybe who just started with their PhD, that's still that well grounded on the basics of qualitative research, or both research rather. So at honors level, one needs to be able to at least have the basic skill in the field of research. They need to be able to understand the concepts, because I think that's where the hinge of research is. Do they understand where these concepts fall within? And that's one of the aspects that I want to deal with in the next few slides. But at the master's level, you want people to at least show some level of advanced research skill, to be able to apply the principle to plan and execute an advanced research in the specific field of study. And obviously, the PhD level, the expectations are very high. You want somebody to be able to show an advanced research skill and knowledge contribution. I think PhD knowledge contribution is very important. We want your research to be able to show some form of contribution. It's no longer about, and this is a debate within research, where because publications are incentivized, people can get caught up in focusing on production than the quality of their research and what they produce and contribution to that particular knowledge. Now, one of the key things about research, which I have discovered in for the past, I think, 2 to 3 years, when I was in lecturing, my main focus, I lectured research in honors and master student. And what I discovered is that research is mainly, and this is the most core thing, the fundamentals of research is on concepts. If you can't understand the concepts that are involved in research, you will find it difficult to maneuver through the research processes. So one needs to at least be familiar with the concepts that are used in research. And one of that concept is what we call research approaches. Research approaches are basically plans and the procedures for research that encompass steps from a broad assumption of detailed method of data collection, analysis, and interpretation. What do I mean by that? I've had people, I will ask a simple question. You find somebody say, I'm busy with the research. You ask them, what approach are you using? And the person will say, no, I'm not quite sure. What do you mean by that? And you said, okay, what methodology are you using? And I've realized that these questions, they become difficult because people conflate concepts. You find a person refers to qualitative, quantitative, mixed method as methodologies, and he refers to your designs as methods. So when you ask these simple questions, although they might have some philosophical underpinning, you find that there's a difficulty in responding to them. Why? Because people conflate this concept. In research, the concepts are very crucial. And when we speak about approaches, we're talking about what are the approach that we are going to use in tackling this particular research. Because the minute you know the approach will guide the methodology. And the methodology there, I'm speaking about the process. How do you go about conducting the research, or what we call a blueprint of research? And that's where we speak about the different designs in research. So the familiarity with all these concepts that speaks to research is very crucial. And when you know them, it's easy to familiarize yourself with the language of research. I do this activity in my face-to-face classes, where I say, you know that you have a grasp of research when I can just pick any concept in research. And when I say mean, you can be able to tell me what kind of approach will use that particular concept. If I say correlation, somebody should be able to know that correlation will fall under this particular concept. When I say generalization or realizability or ethnography, a person should be able to know where this concept falls. It is easy when you are a researcher, when you read a paper or when you read any document, by just looking at a particular concept to tell somebody that this is a qualitative research, this is a quantitative research, because the concepts already speak to that. Now, for example, when we speak about an approach, for example, a qualitative research is a particular kind of a research approach. Now, if I choose that I'm going to do a qualitative research, that by its own, it then dictates the options or the, what I call it, an inventory of options I have of designs that I can choose from, which I might not be allowed to choose if I'm using quantitative research. And obviously, it is different if I use mixed method research. So I will know what options do I have with regard to designs available to me because of the kind or an approach that I have chosen. And those designs further, they will guide the method and the technique that I can be able to then use in conducting a particular research. Now, when one speaks about an approach, and this is very crucial as well, in a sense that we're speaking about the research that attempts to collect rich descriptive data in respect of a particular phenomenon, a context within the intention of developing understanding of what is being observed. Now, key, according to Neverhans, is that qualitative research, the most important characteristics, we conduct it because we want to observe or collect rich descriptive data. That's the most important aspect of qualitative research. I will engage in it because I want rich data. I want to be able to analyze and speak about that particular data I've collected. I don't engage in it because I want to generalize my findings, as quanti will allow you to do. That is why most people who are inclined or have been groomed within the quanti, they seem to have difficulty with some of the methods or the techniques that are used in quali, mainly because you can find that in quali somebody can use one participant, or what you will call in quantitative, one sample. So you find one participant become the data point of data collection for that particular research. And in qualitative, we have all the principles that can actually allow us to be able to do that, because the focus, it is not on the quantity, but it is on the rich descriptive data that qualitative research allow us to collect. Now, there are principles that are inherent within qualitative research, and one of them is that we seek to understand a phenomena in context. This is a real world settings, and obviously, I won't go into the, if you understand the philosophical background of both the quali and the quanti, you'll understand that, you know, quali actually developed because of the challenges that we had in quantitative, where there were certain aspects of research which we could not quantify. Things like your emotions, where we felt that you could not be able to quantify emotions. We need to be able to analyze them. We need to have a narrative that explains this particular, what at that time was the variables. They needed to be explained. They needed to be narrative. We needed to look at them within a particular a framework or an approach. Hence, you have what you call your qualitative research. So they look at phenomena within context. It's a real world setting. So the research is carried out in a real life situation, not an experiment. What you will have as a test, retest situation in qualitative research. There are no attempts by the researcher to manipulate the phenomena of interest. What we want to do, as I've showed you in the previous slide, we want to gain understanding of that particular phenomena. So, colleagues, I think I've spoken a lot so far. I don't want to lose anybody. Are there any questions that maybe on the chat that I might have missed that needs attention before I go to the next section? Okay. I see no hand or no question. Allow me to move on. On the part B, I will focus on the qualitative research design, and please feel free to put questions on the chat. I can be able to attend to them while I talk. On section B, we focus on the qualitative research design, or and also the qualitative research techniques. Now, as I've said in the previous slide, the minute you choose a research approach, the research approach will guide you on the research design that you can use. And consequently, the research design will guide you on the research method and techniques. And I'm mentioning this because it's basic in research that if I know your approach, there are certain design I will not find you using them, and that is fundamental. The minute somebody choose a particular design, but you look at the method they are using, you see that there's no correlation. It's a fundamental error in research, because you can't do that. The qualitative research approach will dictate what designs are available for you to use, unless somebody use a mixed method approach. So what do I mean by the design? The design is a plan, it's a strategy, it's a blueprint, which move from underlying philosophical assumption to specifying the selection of respondents. So already the design will tell you, how am I going to go about choosing the respondents? It will guide you on the data gathering techniques to be used in data analysis that needs to be done. So already by the design, you are already paved a path that you can follow in conducting that particular research. I can see, colleagues, that I think my internet show rate, just confirm with me if you can hear me clearly as I speak, because it's concerning me. So I'm wondering if am I audible enough?
Yes, you're audible, and we see your slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Now, there are different research designs that are available. I told you, the minute you choose a design, it already gives you an inventory of options with regard to the methods or methodologies that you can use. Now, what you see there, colleagues, it is by no means exhaustive designs that are available in qualitative research. I just gave you the common ones, but chances are very likely, if you engage in qualitative research, these are the common ones you are going to come across. Now, they can be divided into three. The first one we speak about, and I'm going to explain each one of them that is here. We can speak about your non-interactive or analytical concepts or design. These are designs that involve documents, concept. For example, your concept analysis, historical analysis, content analysis. And you also have what we call your interactive. Mainly this kind of design, they involve people as participants. And you also have your interactive and non-interactive. These ones can actually involve either one of the first two options that I've given you. Now, if I were to explain or give an example of them, for example, your concept analysis. I remember in the Risana, there was a section that I think I was involved with. If I remember correctly, it had to do with literacies in medical research. Now, this particular design can fit well in research along that particular field. So when we speak about concept analysis design, so if I say I'm going to do qualitative, this will be one of the design. But what does this design mean? It is a design that describes meaning, use, and application of educational concept. For example, I showed you a study I've done. I focus on an educational concept called mother tongue conceptual research. There's a research that I just briefly accepted a month ago, where I looked on the topic called the epistemology of mother tongue concept. And I was engaging on the way we use the concept mother tongue within an African context needs to be revisited, because children no longer just speak the language of the mother. They can speak the language of the father. They can speak the language of the environment they come from. They can speak a language that even the mother and the father is not their mother tongue. So I was arguing for the concept mother tongue, that we need to revisit why we use this particular concept and which one will be more the best concept. And I made a contribution that there are other concepts we can use. We can speak about the dominant language, for example. So one will then adopt a concept analysis to be able to engage in that particular research. Because why? I'm engaging on the use of particular concepts. One can do the same in anatomy, for example. You look at the way certain concepts are used or how they are similar in a different educational programs. And you can argue that the way this concept is used in this particular field can be conflated with the way it is used in another aspect. Maybe we need to consider using it differently within this particular field of study. So concept analysis is that kind of research. You look at the description of meaning, concepts within educational framework. And you have what we call historical analysis. Historical analysis, basically you identify, study, and interpret data to try to understand or explain the past educational events and how that influence current events. I mean, I see in UNISA, for example, they are big on decolonization in terms of their research. One can also do the same in SMU or in any other study where you look at, I'll make an example of anatomy because I presented to them a lot, where one can look at how the anatomy books, the content are. Are they more European in approach that makes it difficult for them to be understood by the kind of students that were attracted at SMU? Is there a need perhaps for us to start to motivate for new books to be developed that speaks to the kind of students that we attract within this particular field, the books that can make them understand the concept easier? Or is it still difficult to understand what you are teaching them within that particular field? So one can look historically at what has happened in the past and be able to produce research along those lines. And the other one is on content analysis, the study of content of a situation or something. And this can also be a book where you look at the content of that particular book. You look at the content of mathematics book, content of any other book that you use. And I remember, we used to, in psychology, we used to look at the kind of images or examples that they give when they speak about certain concepts. And most of them, and I think that's where also there's been a lot of revolution in terms of decolonization in psychology, where they want to decolonize the educational system, where they change even the book and the contents. Because some of the examples you find there, you find that one cannot easily relate with because they are not even from their context. So those things, you look at them within a framework that is available in qualitative research called content analysis. So the minute I know my study and I know the designs which are available, it's easy to pick the one that will fit the study that I do. And the other one is legal proceedings. This might not necessarily fall within our framework of study, but you might want to do a study that actually requires you to take a legal framework approach. For example, one might look at, the care of cadavers. I think there was a story that came, I think somewhere in the world about, the way they treated the cadavers. So one may look at the care, the human dignity that you still show in cadavers, and it can be a legal approach that you engage in conducting that particular study. Most of these are used in law that govern educational processes. So these are some of the examples that are available in terms of the design that fall under non-interactive. But you also have others that fall under interactive. And I told you this, they look at more into your discourse, narrative, life history. So if I take the first one, for example, allow me just to give just 2 examples, then I move to the next one so I don't waste much time. Your discourse, you explore the organization or ordinary talk and everyday explanations and the social action performed in them. So this kind of research, one can actually take the minutes, the report of a particular Okay, thank you, Prof. Sorry about that. Yes, the narrative research, it focuses on, I think it's self-explanatory. You focus on the narrative, the stories. I know somebody who did a study who focused on one of a rape victim, and she was narrating the story of her experiences. And that particular person was the only participant in that particular study. It was a master study. So you can focus on a narrative. I mean, one can do a study, you look at a PhD experience of a particular student or a master's experience. You know, there are people who have unique stories that they want to narrate, and one can actually bring a research out of that. So it is a narrative research. I'm not going to go to all of them. Allow me to move to the last one, and so that I can just touch on it, and then we can move on to the other section. The case study, and case study is one of the most commonly used design in qualitative research. If you check most of the research papers in qualitative, you are going to find majority of them are based on a case study. A case study aims to gain an in-depth understanding of a practice or issue to facilitate information and decision making. It examines a bounded system. It could be one person, a group, or an event. You provide an extensive description of a case. For example, I can focus on second-year MBCHB student experiences of working with cadavers. So them as a second-year student can become a case that I focus on. Now, one can focus on lecturers in a particular field. They become a case study, those particular group of lecturers. And then we have what we call ethnographic design. Now, this one, the last two are not often used within medical research, but I think one can actually use them. You find them a lot in social research. People in sociology, psychology, they use them a lot. So basically in here, you describe an interpretation of cultural or social groups or system to gain a comprehensive understanding of the complexity of the group. For example, one can actually look at the experiences of non-South African intern doctors at Harangua Hospital or George Mokare Hospital. So you look at those people, you want to understand them within you want to understand their experiences within their particular context. What one needs to do, the last two are actually, they can be easily confused. For example, when you look at the phenomenology, speaking about increased understanding of individual lived experience, understand the different perspective. It involves in-depth interview with the subject to obtain their perspective on how they make sense out of a particular experience or situation or event. So the difference between the two is that when it comes to ethnography, you have the lived experience, rather the phenomenology. You have the lived experience, what a person will do. If I want to understand the experiences of non-South African interns at Harangua, I will go there to the hospital. I will spend time with them as they do their duties. I will be there most of the time and be part of the experiences as they do their work in order to have lived the experiences. So when I interview them to clarify some of the things I have observed. That's the phenomenology. While with ethnography, I can be able to have an interview with these people. I can sit with them and do a case study or a focus group just to understand them. But the other one, you have a lived experience. You become part of them. You partake in what they partake. You eat their food. You sit with them as they talk. You engage in their conversation. You start to understand them because you have lived experience of the challenges that they go through, and you spend time with them. Now, the last section of this, the last part of this section, it focuses on the method and the techniques. And I've told you that these two concepts, methodology and the methods, should not be conflated. When we speak about the methods in research, we are speaking about what sampling, data collection, data analysis you are going to follow in conducting research. But when we speak about a technique, we are speaking about the instrument, the devices that you are going to use in conducting that particular research. Now, when we speak about sampling, and one thing that I've emphasized with research is that, research is about concepts. And when one speaks, we usually say, a student must speak the language, and I think it's said that I mean, we have a lot of staff, but not a lot of students. We wanted to target them because those are where the challenges lies in terms of research. Research is about the language. I don't want to know who's part of your study. I want to know what was sampling criteria, what was sampling method. I want to hear these concepts coming out as you speak and conduct research. So you want to hear somebody breathe the research lingo, if that's the way to put it. So it involved the decision about the selection of people, setting, events, and behavior process to observe. Now, when it comes to qualitative, and this is very crucial, and this is where I think the hinge of the debates are, and what people have concerns about, is qualitative is not at anyhow aimed at generalization of results or information. The most important and crucial aspect of it, we want to gain knowledge. We want to gain rich knowledge of a particular phenomenon and be able to share that knowledge within a particular research context. While one of the key things about quantity is about the results which are generalized to the larger population. With qualitative, we can go as far as generalizing the results to the context that is similar to the context that we have conducted research. So we need to distinguish these two, because where people who come from quantity find it difficult to adapt to quali is that the sampling in quali might not be enough to justify generalization, which is not the goal in qualitative. In qualitative, we want to gain in-depth understanding. We want to sit with people down. We want to read documents. We want to do interviews. It's a process or something that is allowed in quali that I will not get in quantitative. So in quali, the sample size, it is not big. It is not too big rather, but it's also not too small. But you can get away with any form of sample, but we don't want to go too big in terms of the sampling. What is more important in quali is how you justify your particular research design. Being able to justify the design that you have chosen. That's the most important part. If I choose to work with 2 people, if I choose to work with 3 people, can I be able to justify why those people are sufficient for me to conduct my research? I mean, somebody can do a content analysis of 1 book. It's still a form of research. I'm working on a book in research. I'm looking at other books in research that do the kind of book that I want to do. So it's a content analysis. So I need to justify why I chose those particular participants and why are they sufficient for them to be able to help me in conducting research. Now, when it comes to sampling, if I was doing a mixed method or both quanti and quali, I would have referred to your probability sampling. But because I'm focusing on qualitative, the focus is on non-probability sampling. But one needs to know that when you engage in research, you always need to be in touch with the fact that all these concepts exist in another approach, but they are different. For example, we have simple random sampling in quantity, then we have convenient sampling, we have stratified, and then we have also purposive sampling. We have systemic sampling, we've got quarter sampling. Quarter sampling can be likened to what you might do in cluster. The difference here is that in qualitative, our focus is on non-probability sampling. The sampling is not selected on statistical randomness, but according to some or other principle as indicated here. What are these principles? For example, in quali, I can choose a sample based on convenience. Convenience basically is simply explanatory. You choose people because it is convenient for you. I can decide researching the healthcare workers' perception about the taking of vaccines. And I decide that I want to focus particularly on nursing staff. And I say, I'm going to focus on the nursing staff at George Mokari. Why? It is convenient for me. They are available for me. They are here for me to work with. So convenience is you justifying it based on the context where you are. These are the stuff that are available to you. So this could be stuff in George Mukari, could be stuff that are available in SNU. It is convenient for you. The other thing could be purposeful or judgment. Use expect people to select cases with specific purposes. For example, I can decide I want to study the experiences of people who care for cadavers within a health science institute. What do? I go to anatomy. I choose all the technical stuff that are involved in the care of cadavers. Somebody asked me, but why did you choose these ones? I chose them because they're the one who take care, who do this particular work. They're expert in that particular knowledge. Nobody can take care of cadavers at SNU beside this particular group of people. So expert there, don't look at it in terms of knowledge of research, but they are expert in terms of the knowledge I want to research as a researcher. So you can go to Mamelodi or you can go to Soshanguve and speak to parents who are raising children alone, and you want to understand the challenges of being a parent raising a child as a single parent, and you choose particular group of parents. Why do you choose them? These are parents who are raising kids alone. They are experts in that particular knowledge. So as a researcher, I choose them because of that particular. So they're still experts within their right. So look at expert within that particular context. So you purposefully or you judge the kind of sample that you want based on that sample being able to give you the information that will help you in conducting research. And then you have what you call your quota sampling. Your quota sampling, basically, you can divide a population, and you need to distinguish this from how you'll go about it in cluster, in quantity. Here, the purpose is not on randomness. What you do, I want to understand the perception of SMU students regarding vaccine. So what do? Because I'm also interested in the different groupings of these students, I divide them according to population groups because I'm also interested on the group perception. How do they differ? Do the whites, the blacks, the Asians have a different perception about vaccines? So I divide them according to different groups. And based on that, I just select randomly, any non-randomly, from the ones who decided to be part of the study. In other ways, I just sent a questionnaire out there. Whoever answer, I separate them according to the quotas that I'm interested in. So the purpose there, it is not on the focus there, it is not on the selection, but on the division that we have and being able to get different perspectives based on the divisions that I have. Then the other part is looking at the methods. Now with the methods, one can easily be confused because quali and quanti, in terms of the methods and instrument, they are similar, although not the same. In which way? In quanti and quali, I can use an observation form as part of my technique or an instrument. However, in quantitative rather, most of your techniques are going to be standardized. In other ways, if I'm using an observation form, let's say I'm doing a clinical assessment, I want to understand the cognitive status of a patient. What I will do, I will use a form that has been accepted or standardized within the to be able to guide and be able to give me the cognitive status of a patient. While in quali, I can use what we call a semi-standardized or an unstandardized form that I used. So in quanti, everything is standardized. If I do an interview, that interview will be standardized. I will have a form or an interview schedule that has been standardized to be used for that particular phenomena that I'm researching. While in quali, it might be semi-structured or unstructured. In other words, I come up with questions that will speak to the research question that I want to research. Nobody has come up with this question. I didn't find them anywhere. It's the question that I feel they'll be able to guide the study that I'm doing. The same with the focus group. So you will have more standardized. So most of the people can become confused because all of these methods, and that's where maybe you find people conflating methods. The method can be similar, but they will differ in terms of their structure. Quanti is very structured in its approach. That's why the strength of its generalization is very high. While with Quali, the focus is on the rich description. Will these questions be able to give me the information that I will consider as rich for my data and allow me to analyze it? So that's section B, colleagues. I want to focus on the last section. I hope you've been following so far, and I hope it provided clarity on the two methods and the approaches that we follow, because what I have shared is actually the background, the fundamental basics of research, because most of us, we find ourselves where we have to now start to plan for research. But if the past slides or the topics I've dealt with in the past slides, one is not grounded in, this section will be the most difficult section, because this is the advanced aspect of it, of research, where now you plan for your research project, where now these concepts now and must be used. And you remember, I mean, you have reviewers now who look at your study and they're going to pick this when concepts are used randomly without being used properly within the context of research. Now, planning for a research project, basically, I'm going to focus on how do you select a research focus. I'm on 49, Dr. Nolte. Dr. Utle, if I understand correctly, I need to finish at 3. I hope I'll still be within.
And no, you have time until 4 o'clock. Not that you have to go until 4 o'clock, but at least you don't have to rush or feel rushed or feel stressed. You can just complete normally.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Because this part, I think, is the part that where majority of us we are at, and I want to take as much time as possible in going through the different aspects of it. I'm going to focus on selecting a research focus, conducting a literature review, and I'm going to be touching on this, on just key things, not elaborating on any of them, how to develop a research question, and how to state your rationale. And I'm going to also focus on choosing a meta theory. I think it's the most important part, because it's an area that personally I know I struggled with. And deciding on data collection and deciding on data analysis. And I will finalize by just touching on some of the outline of the possible research or possible research outline, rather. I think it's a typing error there. So when we speak about selecting a research focus, I give this example, and I think anybody who comes from a BSc or in mathematics can relate with this. You know, topics are very broad and fields are very broad. Now, if you ask somebody, what are you researching? He said, no, my research field, I've got interest in mathematics. Now, mathematics is very broad, and one needs to choose a particular niche within mathematics. We want to know, are you focusing on the mathematics pedagogy? Are you focusing on mathematics career or professional? Are you focusing on the attitude, perception, experiences regarding mathematics? Because people have got different perceptions about it. But mathematics also has got its own language. Are you focusing perhaps on the language of mathematics? You know, how the fact that there's no books that are developing indigenous languages with regard to mathematics, how difficult it is to access the field of mathematics, because not only do you study the concept, but you also have to have a grasp of the concept within mathematics. So mathematics is a broad thing. Usually as you grow and you develop in research, you come to a level where you need to now choose a niche within your particular field. I only realized this when I published, and I think it's a mistake that I've done, and I mean, we all learn from our mistakes, that As you develop in research, choosing a niche becomes very crucial. And I mean, I'm shocked now. Every time I publish, I don't know how many journals send me emails asking me to be an editor. But what the the sad part is they're asking you on a topic that you wrote because you're in a particular state, but it's not your field of interest. It's just that it was a topic that was viable at that time when you were studying your master's. But because you published, the assumption is that it's your field of interest. And if I were to give an advice to anybody, if you could choose a niche early, it will really open a lot of doors, because just for one paper, let's say you are a lecturer, that one paper can open a door for you to become an editor on a particular journal, which already start to build your profile towards your professorship. For some of us don't want to be professors, it doesn't matter. But for academic who want to be a professor, I think that is very crucial. You choose a niche early, because that niche, that paper will open many doors. And you can be able to then develop yourself as a researcher within that particular field. So think about that. When we speak about research, as you develop, particularly when you start to move to a PhD, ideally, you want a person at the master's level to start to write about the field as a foundational work. At the master's level, you want to lay the foundation of the field that you want to branch into. At the PhD level, you want to take your master's level higher and start to build on what you have actually done at your master's level. Then post PhD now, you want to establish yourself as a researcher in that particular field by now even getting rated in your field of research. So if you look at research as a journey, you realize that it doesn't start at a post-PhD or even at the PhD level. It actually starts at the master's level. Because the frustration will be, you publish in a field that you are not interested in a master's level. You go to a PhD, you take a totally different topic. Then you post your PhD, you start to write article in a totally different field from what you have done in the past years. Anybody who has done research knows that just to get into an article and produce a good article, you need a good grasp of the concept and the field that you are writing on. So imagine if from a master's level, you start working on a particular field of knowledge, and that becomes your specialization. And I think that's why the minute you start to want to get rated now, they look at things like, have all the researchers, have all the reviewers, do they agree that you are actually established researcher or have a potential in that particular field? How do they look at it? They look at how you have published and you are being quoted in that particular field. And that can only happen when you have chosen a particular niche that you focus on. Now, selecting a niche or a focus area is not an easy thing. Vithal and Prof. Jansen made a statement. They said a research focus often takes a form of a statement or focus of a particular purpose. For example, you can express let's say, for example, your interest is in mathematics profession, for example. One can make a statement. The purpose of this research is to gain understanding of the perception of students with regard to a professional career in the field of mathematics. So your research focus, and that's why you will see this in articles, they always want you to be specific about your keywords. Keywords, not only do they help when somebody is searching for your research, but it also helps to guide us of the focus of your research. And the minute you become familiar with the keywords that are within your field of interest, the more you can easily develop yourself as, I think expert is a big word, but as you can establish yourself as a researcher in that particular field. So it will start with you understanding a purpose of that particular study. And after that, you need to then conduct a research. Allow me to quote this scripture where King Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. I learned this at my M level. But when it comes to research, you need to appreciate that what you are going to research, and I made this point before, somebody researched it somewhere. So you need to appreciate as a researcher the fact that there are what we call the gurus, the experts in the field. And I think as a researcher, you need to have what we call, or I don't know if anybody calls it, research etiquette, where you must appreciate and acknowledge those whom we have also, only the whole research community acknowledge as gurus in a particular field. I think it's a form of maybe academic ignorance when you don't even quote those people, you don't refer to those people, because you need to understand that whatever topic you come with, you need to read about certain people who wrote strongly on that particular topic. You can't ignore them. You'll always be referred to the gurus. They have established knowledge. They have done a lot. You can't have somebody, speaking about in science or physics, and you know gurus in that field, your Einstein in that particular field. You can't speak about language, and you know people who have done a lot in that field of knowledge. So you need to know within your specialization or the field that you have chosen as your niche, who are the people whom are considered as experts in that field. And the idea behind understanding the expert is not necessarily for you to agree with everything they said, but firstly, as a form of scholarship, you need to at least acknowledge what they've said and be able to put your point out there, regardless of how it differs from them. But you engage critically with them and what they have said based on the new knowledge that might have been developing. So when you conduct research, you need to ensure that your research makes new contribution. That's the most important part. The second thing, I've spoken about this, understand expert opinion. The third thing, you need to, you develop yourself in research by, giving talks, in seminars, in conferences. You develop yourself more when you go to presentation like this. You go out there, you take your work out there, let people criticize it. And I think publishing is also one of them. If there's an area which I know it can be really demoralizing, it's trying to publish and you are not grounded in what you are trying to do. You have reviewers who are very kind, but there are others who can really give you, they can really give you feedback, So you have people like that. And I think in a way it helps. I mean, I remember my paper, it was rejected by 10 journals. And I told my supervisor, I'll never publish again. I don't think this field is mine. And I was shocked with my PhD, just first submission, it got accepted. I did another article on my own, it got accepted. And if I only went with what I heard from the previous experience, I would have stayed away from this field because I found them very rude. I found them inconsiderate, not thinking of our feelings, but it's part of the scholarship, it's part of the development. And I think the fact that these things happen blindly, they don't know you, it is nothing personal. It's something that we can learn from, we can grow from, and develop ourselves. What you just have to do, you continue reading scholarly articles. What are people saying out there? What have people said in this particular topic? And this is the most important thing. And I've realized as SMU, as researchers to grow, the only way to do that is more reading, particularly in our topic that we want to develop ourselves as or establish ourselves in those particular topics. So when it comes to conducting literature review, firstly, the key thing understand, somebody has studied that particular topic. Somebody has done it. There's no way you are going to be the first person to come with something that nobody knows under the earth. There's no way. It might not have been done in a similar way, but it is done in some form or the other. And I think I will go with King Solomon's way. There's nothing new under the sun. So you put that in your mind as you do any form of research. That's why we always say reference people. You can't tell us every opinion, every statement you make. It comes from you. Tell us what other people have said. Then when you have done your research review, the key other aspect of research in qualitative is what we call a research question. If you are doing quantity, we speak about hypothesis, testing a hypothesis. In qualitative, we speak about research questions. you need to be able to answer your research question. The most important thing about research question, you must understand what we call their bad research questions, and you need to avoid them. So this kind of research question that you want to avoid are what we call developmental question, where somebody can ask a question, how can a first-year psychology student become better psychologist? That's developmental. As people develop, they can become better. So that's not what will form a good research question. Anybody can answer that without even having to do a research. People know that development helps, and people grow and become better as they develop. The other question, which we call what we call the planning question. What can be done to design spiritually focused curriculum for psychiatry modules? If you go there in psychiatry, you hear nurses speak about this is spiritual, you know? And somebody can ask that question, but that's not what can fall under a good scientific question, because it's a planning question. We can plan these things. After planning them, we can be able to develop the module if it is needed. There's also a question that we call obvious answer. Will disadvantaged students on NSFAS learn better if they get nutritional meal at university? That's obvious. Nutritional meal, research has been done. You can go to diet and whatever. You see a lot of research where they speak about the importance of nutritional meal. So the important thing about this slide, colleagues, is to understand that there are questions that fall under certain aspects, but they're not good questions to ask for research. There's what we call a preaching question. What can be done to prevent sex before marriage among students? That's a preaching question. You get that in church. These are the statements when the pastors want to make their congregation focused and spiritually uplifted and all that. And there's what we call low-level questions. What medical aid scheme do most NBCHB lecture belong to? It's a low-level questions, because just a quick questionnaire today, I can be able to get the answer. So there are questions that they are not intriguing to be considered good for a scientific research. They're also what we call committed questions. I won't go to all of them, but the most important thing is to understand what you call, you need to distinguish the difference between bad questions and research questions. Bad questions and good research question. Now, a good research question has got certain characteristics. They have no simple answer. They're very open-ended. And they consider the cause and effect. They don't necessarily have to use those words, particularly in qualitative research, but they consider that. They are researchable. The questions I've given you, I don't need to do research to answer them. I can answer them by referring you to the process that must be followed. But when you speak about the good qualitative research question, they are researchable. They need you to conduct a particular research to answer them. They open the door for other areas of research inquiry. They often begin with how, what, why. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean if you have a question that starts with what, then it's a good question. But it's how you use those particular words in those questions that makes it one of the good questions. And the last thing is that they pass the so what test. You ask a research question, somebody say, so what? What if you get the answer? So what? If it doesn't pass that particular test, it might fall under what we call a bad research question. Now, I want to give an example of a research question. And one of the things we need to know about a research question, in qualitative, usually you find people have 5 questions, 6 questions, 3 questions, but they will have a main research question. A main research question, sorry, a broad and overall question that entire study aims to answer. So the whole, I remember when I do my PhD, it's like you are doing an assignment for 4 years or 3 years, because you are answering this question in a lot and pile of papers. But that's the whole idea with the qualitative. In quantity, you go through all this work in order to test a hypothesis. While in quali, we go through this process in order to answer our main research question. But the research question, to understand it, is easily understood as the reformulation of your research focus. If I know my research focus, if I know my title, I can easily from there reformulate what is my research statement. I gave an example there. Let's say my research statement is that this study aims to understand the extent to which the NBCH2 second-year student experiences are affected by the dissection of cadavers. That's the aim, that's the purpose of my study. When I have that, I can easily now be able to formulate a research question. And what could be the research question? The research question could be, to what extent, if any, are the experiences of MBCHB second year students affected by the dissection of cadavers? Now, one can tell me by just asking that I can just get an answer. Simple answer. I need to do a research. I need to check. I need to speak to them. I need to interview them. It is not a simple answer that anybody can give me. Only the students who do this can be able to provide me with that answer within qualitative research. Now, if I can have that main answer of my main research question, then I can also have what we call research sub-questions. Now, the research sub-questions should always be linked to the main research question. Usually when you do qualitative research, when you have your sub-questions build towards your main research question that you answer in your last chapter or in your last section if you are writing an article. For example, when we speak about research question, there are derivatives of the main research question. The questions must be logically linked to each other. In other words, sub-question 1 must be able to help you in answering sub-questions 2. And the questions should also be conceptually linked to each other through the key terms. I should be able to see how are these questions linked to each other. But also, if the questions are good enough, they should be able to stand alone as researchable questions on their own. That is why somebody can take a study that has got different questions, for example, your PhD, your master's, and from your master's, just do an article that focuses on one question, and that becomes an article. Because the questions, even though there were sub-questions in a particular study, they can also stand alone as researchable questions. I'll give an example. Look at this question that I've made. My research question, the main one, is to what extent, if any, are the experiences of MPCHB second year student affected by the dissection of cadavers? From there, I'm able to then draw sub-questions that can build towards that particular question. The first one will be, how can the experiences of MPCHB student be conceptualized? For example, when I speak about experiences, what do I mean? Somebody might want to understand them. How will I understand these experiences? How will I be able to understand them, research them? What do I mean by experiences? So I'll need to find out there, and that's on a conceptual level. But secondly, one might say, what are the experiences of this second year student concerning the dissection of cadavers? Now, not only do I want to understand the experiences, but I want to relate them to a particular experience. I want to relate them to a particular context. And this is with regard to the dissection of cadavers. I don't want to understand the experiences, how they learn physiology. I don't want to understand how they learn anatomy. I want to understand with regard to the dissection of cadavers. How do they experience this? Why am I doing this? It is answered by the rationale. The second question, the last question could be, what is the relationship between the experiences of MBCH2 student second year and the dissection of cadavers? I hear people, I remember when I came to SMU and also when I was still a student, you hear people say, you know what, these students, they look at the second year, the way they walk, these students are affected by these cadavers, they're affected. And you wonder how much of that it is true. How much of that is true? So somebody then, by hearing those statements, become intrigued to say, can I just research this? Can I maybe want to find out that the way the second year behave, the way they look when they come from dissection, it is not affected by the fact that other things, other part of their course might not be going well. Could they be that there are other reasons beside dissection? Could it be they're enjoying it? They can't wait to get there. This for them is adventurous. You know, seeing a cadaver there, having to see the system of the human body. They can't wait for that day. Could it be that we have, you know, imposed experiences that are not correct? And so one then wants to understand, is there any relationship between the two? Colleagues, these questions of mine, they are mine. If you want them, you must come. I must give you an ethical clearance. So these are sub-questions that one can be able to develop from one main research question. And you can see from looking at them that these questions are logically linked to each other. You can be able to see when you look at question 1, I'm asking about the conceptualization of experiences. When you look at question 2, I want to understand these experiences. And the last question, I want to compare them. The hinge of the whole questions is on the experiences of NBCHB second year student. And the minute you have that in mind, you realize that your questions are speaking to each other and you are able to conduct a study without being confused in the process. That is why sometimes you find people, they do a study in the middle of their study. And I'm not saying this as it's a common thing. I've been in it, anybody can be in it, but it doesn't mean you are not good in research. But it could imply that one loses the grasp of the research process as they go on with research. Where in the middle of your study, you are wondering, what am I exactly researching here? You wish you can change your research questions. You feel like your topic doesn't fit into the research. It is not a sign that you are not a good researcher. I think it's something that we all go through it. But one of the reason for that, it could be, as you go on, the minute you lose a grasp of your questions, you don't have a good grasp of these questions and how they link to each other, you might easily feel lost in the process of your research. That is why it is good when you write your proposal, your research questions, you must be clear about them. You need to see how they're going to develop until the end of your study. And also, like I said, this research question should be able to stand alone. You can see when you look at this question, I can ask them as individual questions, and one can be able to do a research on each of these questions. Now, the other question that I've asked, which obviously when you do a study, you ask yourself will be, when you write your proposal or when you write an article, particularly when you write your abstract, some of the things that you put there is a rationale. If I was writing a book, I'll speak a preface. What are the thoughts? What are the reasoning that led you to be able to want to engage in this particular research? So a rationale, what triggered you as a researcher to be interested in this topic? The reason the researcher believes the research is worth doing. This is what we want to know in a rationale. So every research thing that you engage in, whether it's a paper, whether it's an article, whether it's a book, you need to be able to have your rationale in place. You need to understand, where am I engaging? The rationale is actually what gives you the impetus. It's what gives you the motivation, the zeal to want to engage in research. I've been a student at SMU. I'm an employee at SMU. And I still hear people speak about how the cadavers affect the people. I'm very strong about it. Not that I want to research it, I'm not going to research it, but because I've heard it a lot, if I'm to write an article, I already have a strong rationale because I've heard people. I'm going to say what I have heard. I've heard people speak about that. I've heard, but these students I hear are not students doing the course. Are the students who are neither doing the course, and there are also staff who are neither lecturing the course. So now I want to speak to the students whom these views are imposed on, and I want to understand them. So you could hear that the rationale is there, but it has a story behind it. And that's the whole idea about a rationale. The rationale includes your personal experiences, what relates to the topic of the research, what led you to want to research this particular topic. And also, you want to choose a meta theory. Now, please, I'm just using that concept because it is used in research. In simple terms, with meta theory, philosophically speaking, we're speaking about a science focused on theorizing about a theory. In other words, in simple, please ignore it's not the point. The point here, and I'm mentioning this because I want to see it in an article or a paper. So I'm just putting it there so that at least you are aware of it. When we speak about, and I have another presentation which I've done, and obviously in another platform, I thought we were going to have a lot of students. I didn't want to go into the meta-theoretical perspective about this, where every element of research has got a philosophical underpinning behind it, which I don't want to go into it. So I'm using these terms because we'll find them. If somebody does a research and brings these concepts into the fore, you are going to find these concepts. But when I speak about meta theory, I'm speaking about are you going to use a theoretical framework and conceptual framework? This, to some people, it's a simple thing. But to me, it was the most difficult thing. Because when you do research, you will find these two, and I don't know why it happened. It's only, I think, one book, and that's why I had an interest in a book in research, where people will distinguish the two. But most of the time, you find the word theoretical framework and conceptual framework are conflated. These two concepts, colleagues, are different. But these two concepts have got a particular role in research that is different from your research approach. This concept, they speak about how do you organize and manage the literature review. If you look at the research in particular, you realize that the concept I spoke about up to this stage, they manage your research processes. They manage your methodology, your process, how you conduct research. But have you realized that when you conduct the research, there's a section on literature review on any form of research? That aspect of literature review must be managed, and we manage it by what we call your meta theory, your theoretical or conceptual framework. So you need to decide when you do research that this research is underpinned by this particular theoretical framework. That theoretical framework, or it might be underpinned by conceptual. How do you distinguish the two? A theoretical framework is an established theory tested over time, like your dynamic system theory. So a theory that is already existent, it has concepts that you use in order to understand your literature review. While a conceptual framework, for example, I can want to understand a particular concept in anatomy. So because there is no theoretical framework that helps in understanding a particular concept in theory, in anatomy, I can come up with a conceptual framework where I look at different concepts. And from there, I form a conceptual framework. In other words, a structure that helps me understand how to analyze or understand a particular concept. In other words, it's a graphical, a narrative, but this you develop yourself. So you take concepts from different places in order to help you analyze the theory or your literature so that you can be able to conduct your research. So every time you engage in research, you are going to hear these concepts. Dr. Venter, I now finally get it. Look, I got it few not long ago. I struggled with my PhD because I wanted to understand how do you distinguish these two things. So the minute you find a theory, that is why there are books that speak about a theory. What are the characteristics of a theory? A theory is established. You don't go with a theory or established theory and want to impose concepts or introduce new concepts. In a theory, the concepts are already there on how to understand a phenomenon. A conceptual framework, you don't have anything established. It's a new field. Somebody said something there, and you find a conceptual framework most of the time. You find somebody has got a model somewhere. Somebody has got a graph that they've done. You take what they said and you come up with a conceptual framework. You say, this is how I'm going to understand this particular topic. And what you come up with is what I will call now a conceptual framework. So if a theoretical framework does not exist, then you need to come up with your own conceptual framework. Definitely, because there's no theoretical framework. So what you will find, and instead I want to go further in that, most of the time, where there is no theoretical framework, you'll find that there's a lot of models. And this is where conceptual framework comes. Models, you find they always, you feel like they lack something. They lack another, if I can take that. So what one will do, we'll take that particular model and find another model somewhere and come up with a conceptual framework. Models are all over, but models are not established theoretical frameworks. So you will find most of the time, and this is what you'll find, most of the time when there's no theoretical framework, there are a lot of models speaking about the particular topic. So and so came up with this model, 6 steps of understanding parenting, 7 steps of understanding whatever, but you find they are just models. They are not theoretical framework. And you take all these models, and I know this because I had to find out. These are the things that you've noticed. Most of the time where there's no theoretical framework, you'll find the models. But there are a lot of theoretical frameworks that exist out there that you can use. And I usually tell people, as a starter, I'll give an example. I've researched in second language development 2 years or 3 years ago, 4 years ago rather. There are some researchers in America. They came up with an article. I think it was proposal for a theoretical framework towards understanding second language development. Because why? For years, we've been reading about second language development. We're learning from what this guy said, what that guy said, what that guy said, but we never had a framework. So their articles was towards the development of a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework. So they wanted to establish an established framework. And anybody of you can do that. You can do that at your master's and start now understanding that particular field. And as you do that, you start to build upon it on your PhD and develop a framework. I have got a colleague of mine. He's a professor in UJ. He has developed a model. It's a very, I think you call it hyperpreneurship. Don't mind the term. But what it means basically, he speaks about the enablement of disabled people. He did a study where he studied a man in his village who was blind, but the man was able to communicate by what he called echolocation. And from that particular study, he came up with a framework, and he has been presenting and doing an extensive work in order to have his model developed as a conceptual framework. He was developing it to show you that disabled people, they're actually enabled, but they're enabled differently. And his framework is on hyperpreneurship. Basically, when you explain it or break it down, is the ability of people who are viewed as disabled, the fact that they are able in a different rights. So what he does, he just builds on knowledge. He get knowledge on different fields and he built on that particular model. And he view it as his own model because nobody that did it. So you can do that when it comes to conceptual framework. And as it gets used and it develops, people can start to adopt it further. And you find that you are now an established researcher on that particular topic or field. So I hope that is clear, colleagues, because I know it might look easy, but it's when you do a study, when you get confused on where do these concepts come in. Theoretical framework, we're not speaking about the same things, but you'll find they just conflict the two, but they're two different concepts. They differ in that regard. Now, lastly, colleagues, I want to focus on data collection and method. This is the the simplest part in research, because the minute you get here, you already know what you are doing. With regard to that, then you can be able to do data analysis. The most important part is you have the data, you need to analyze it. Collection of data is straightforward. You collect data in whatever form that you took, whether you do interview, case study, but the most important part in qualitative, I think, is on data analysis. People who come from quantity, you are more reliant on the systems, your statistical system that you use in order to generate the variables. It generates the results that you can use and analyze and be able to give a response to your hypothesis, whether it gets rejected or accepted. While in quali, the data analysis, you are more hands-on. You are involved with the process. I think recently you have now new system that help you to be able to analyze data. But I think in quali, you are more hands-on. You need to be able to, understand your data thoroughly. And there's an article that I can share. I think it also helped me a lot when I did data analysis. But in qualitative, the most and mainly commonly used method is thematic analysis. You check any study in qualitative research, 99% of them are going to tell you, qualitative study, we do thematic analysis. It is a method for identifying, analyzing, and reporting on patterns and themes. I will do that, Fatima. Thank you. So you look at themes, and they're not, I think now there are a lot of articles that you will see, but there are few and they have different approaches. And obviously when you read them, I think you will have to find a way in which you go about in analyzing your data. But the gist of the matter is that when you do quali, because remember what I said at the beginning, and that's where everything linked together. We are interested in rich data. Now, what happens now, and this is where it can become very overwhelming. After you collected the rich data, how do I do now with the data? And that's where thematic analysis came in. So thematic analysis now, you look at the data, and I'm going to show you an example. Now you try to understand what are the themes that have emerged and how can I understand them and analyze them. What are the categories? What are the patterns? What are if I was doing quantity, you look at the frequency. But because I'm doing quali, we look at the most occurring patterns, the things. What are the things that are being said a lot? If I were to do a study about research and I do a survey or a poll now, I say, what is the most area that you struggle with in research? Let's say, for example, you mentioned sampling. The fact that majority of you mentioned sampling, it becomes one of the emerging themes that I will then focus on as part of my analysis. So what it does, you follow what we call an inductive process, where data contents from participants are analyzed to form general themes. So you deduce from what you get to be able to form that particular. It's a very practical process, although it involves you to engage with those particular narrative. For example, I will have done in interviews. After you've done an interview, you take them to a transcriber who will have then transcribed what has been narrated. When you get the transcription now, as the researcher, now you go through each of them. Why do you go through each of them? You go through each of them in order to be able to identify the themes. And what you start by doing, what you code them. Code them basically means certain themes that appear more, you start to put them into certain categories. And when you are done, that's when you can go on in describing the themes that have emerged. And that's how you present your qualitative data. I know I might be speaking gibberish, but let me give you an example. And I took this from an extract of a transcript. So what you see there is a transcript. So when a person was reading the transcript, he started to color code, and that's where the coding comes in. Certain statements that sound similar or speak to the specific concept or topic or theme. And as you read, you start to categorize. It could be that this one is speaking about parental support, this one is speaking about kids motivation, this one is speaking about anatomy concept, this one is speaking about. So you color code them to help you when you go back to them to be able to know what are those things that have emerged. When you finish now, you categorize them. For example, here at the top here, under the I don't know if it's orange or blue, under the most colorful one, the third row, my color is very bad, don't mind me. Under that orange section, you have those what we call categories, or what we call your themes there. Now, from reading the transcripts, you have themes that you might have identified. Never mind the model. This was the model that was guided by a meta-theory. So you don't necessarily have to have the model. But the most important thing I'm showing you, that there were themes that were emerging from the transcript. I showed you a study which was based on mentorship. One of the themes that emerged was that constructing mentorship experiences. It was one of the themes that category that emerged. The other one was that people spoke about positive experiences. I remember this study was about how to start a mentorship program in a higher institute. And the other thing that emerged was the negative experiences that can hinder mentorship. And the other one was the program implementation, the challenges that are related to that. And then from each theme, you have what we call sub-themes. Sub-themes basically there will be certain topic or subtopics that speaks to that particular topic. Now, when we have this, then obviously the last part is similar to what we will follow in quantity, where you then analyze the themes that have emerged. But in analyzing them, you are also guided by literature within that particular field. And the last part, and Remember, this section is about how to plan for your research. Obviously, if you write a proposal or you plan for your research article, you must have deadlines that you have that are going to guide that particular study. Colleagues, I think that's basically it. And thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Prof. Utle, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tebe. I really found it very inspiring, this talk. And yes, do we have any questions? Any questions from your side? See, there's a hand. Frida, you may speak. Do you have the ability to speak now?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Dr. Sebe. A very insightful presentation. My question is on sampling when it comes to qualitative approach. You've mentioned that it should not be too small. It should not, I mean, the sample size should not be too small. It should not be too big. Besides the case study, what is the number that one should have in a qualitative study that would allow one's data to really give that richness that is required? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, you know what, that statement, and Dr. Note, allow me to put a caveat there. I think the too small can be misleading. I think it should just read, it should not be too big. Because the smallness there, one was considering the fact that you have sample in a different context. And that is why I gave an example of saying you can have somebody who use 1%. But there are certain contexts where using 1% might not be sufficient for that particular sampling. But 1% can still be enough in qualitative research, and that can still be justifiable. And remember, the richness is not on the quantity of the participants. The richness is in the content of the narrative that you are getting from that particular study. So the fact that you have got 1 or you've got 10 is beside the point. What matters, I mean, you can do a focus group, for example. A focus group has got a minimum of, you have a range of 4 to 8 in a focus group. Now, in a focus group, there's a phenomena of a dominant member or dominant members, where you can have a focus group with 8 people, but you find 2 people opinions are higher than any other person. So even though you've got narrative, they come from just 2 people. They dominated the discussion. So everybody just added in what the discussion, what they have said. So the numbers are not too much, but the content is the most important focus. You can have 1, you can have 10, but I'm not saying you should have 10. I'm just saying you need to limit the number based on what you can manage. It doesn't help you are doing a focus group or you are doing an interview. You interview 20 people wanting to have rich data, but you don't consider that you might struggle or delay in having to read the narratives of 20 people. The question we have to make is, what is the kind of content I need from this? If it's 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, that can still be sufficient. Obviously, if it's 1 person, I gave an example about somebody who did a study with a rape victim. It was only 1 person. But I think they conducted about 3 to 5 interviews. And those interviews were very focused and were very extensive in dealing with that particular topic. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Tebe. Is there anybody else for a question? I hear a click here. Let me just see. I don't see a hand. Just a comment.
Yeah, Prof. Utle, I see there was a comment. I struggled to get 4 members in a focus group in a rural clinics and the gross staff shortage side. Yeah, and maybe I can just comment on that. I don't know whether that was a question or just a comment. And that's where now the sampling method matter. For example, if I were in that situation, I will go with a convenient sampling. I will choose and work with the numbers available to me. I have 4 people on a focus group because this is what is available. And that is still justifiable to be able to conduct a focus group with those people. That's the most focus of the qualitative. What you will do, however, you will make sure that those focus group with those 4 people is very detailed and extensive so that we can get rich data, even though it's limited in terms of the number, because we're still within the 4 and the 8 that is recommended. Actually, it's between even 4 and 12 that you can work with, but it doesn't need to be too big. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I found it very inspiring, your talk, and it is so good to hear a person speaking out of experience, because I really think, you know, one can get a lot of information on the internet, but you don't get that experience side and that the person side. And thank you for sharing your experience then. I'm sure that as we progress with our studies, that we will have more questions. Can you see anything progressing from this presentation? Is there any follow-up that you could think of that would help us as we progress with our protocols or our studies?
No, definitely, Prof. And thank you for the compliment. I just wish I had that experience. I'm very humbled by that compliment. Look, Prof, we can discuss it. And I think what will be best perhaps is also for colleagues maybe to give feedback and speak about other areas of needs that they might want us to focus on. I will be more than willing to work out a presentation given that. So we can, based on the feedback, we can discuss on what areas we want to focus on. Thank you.
What I will do is maybe I will send everybody that gave me their email addresses plus the Derisana people that's listed on there. I'll write to them a letter, and then they could verbalize their needs to me, and then we can maybe more purposefully create another session when you have time and when things work out.
I will definitely do that, Prof. No problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, then I wish to thank everybody for joining, and yes, happy researching. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Prof.
Bye.